time to do this. You're going to be over at the Saint later on tonight in Asbury. Which is this your first time playing?
Absolutely, first time I played in Asbury Park.
Well, it's about time. We've been waiting for you for the last,
Thank you.
last 25 years or so. We've got a lot of catching up to do. So, mind if we take a trip back before we take a trip forward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just remind people of where you've been, because I found your story to be really intriguing. I mean, as far as having back in the 80s, I mean, your band, the Dan Reed Network, which was formed by you and a bunch of friends, right, out in Portland, which is one of the most gorgeous cities on the planet, by the way. If people need to go out to the Northwest, and you hear all about Seattle, go to Portland. It's nice. But anyway, you basically found success quickly as far as the record industry falling in love with you. And wanting you to be a part of the industry, and so you got hooked up with some of the biggest people in the
well, Derek Schulman, who had signed Bon Jovi and a lot of different bands, but that was kind of his big success at that time. Ended up signing us to Polygram,
right? Which was at the time one of the biggest labels in the world.
Yeah,
it was an international company that was huge.
And then and then Bill Graham from San Francisco, of course, he came up and saw us play, and right after we got our deal, and he wanted to manage the band, so him and his company, Mick Brigden and Arnie Postolnik and a bunch of folks there, took the band under his wing.
I mean, and Bill passed away in the early 90s, right? In the helicopter crash.
That's correct.
So you were probably one of the last acts that he was involved in.
Well, we had actually started working with Q Prime after we spent 2 years with Bill, and we started working with Q Prime after that, and then I had actually talked to Bill about 2 weeks before he passed away, and he'd just done that film called Bugsy, where he played a gangster, and he was so excited about acting again, because that was where his roots started. He was in an acting troupe before he discovered the Dead and all these other bands in the Bay Area. So he was gone full circle, so it was great to see that he had found his passion again.
Well, so that's a great story that he left with a smile on his face.
Yeah,
basically.
absolutely.
You must have heard some great stories from Bill.
Yeah.
You can just imagine some of the stories he must have been able to tell you about.
Yeah, he said one thing. He goes, Van Halen was my favorite band right before they got together. He didn't like them very much.
Some people would argue that they never actually got together.
Exactly.
That's a story for a different time, I suppose. So you're right in the middle of being involved with some of the biggest people in the industry in the world. People are taking you under their wing. People like Bruce Fairbairn.
Yeah, Bruce Fairbairn, absolutely.
At that time was the preeminent producer in rock and roll.
Yeah.
And he took you under his wing and produced the first big record for you.
Yeah, I did our first and our third album.
And MTV grabbed a hold of you guys.
Yeah.
And so what kind of culture shock was it to go from a couple of kids in Portland, going, in school, becoming the Dan Reed Network, and then all of a sudden, you're lit up?
Well, it was even more so than that, because my drummer and I moved from South Dakota to Portland. So I grew up on a farm listening to Cheap Trick and the Doobie Brothers on the radio, just dreaming about being on stage one day. And so we used to play like proms. I remember we played all of the record 2112 at a prom one time, and they hated us. They said, you can't dance to that record. But
Neil Peart's never been known as the drummer who lays down beats and dance. That's not exactly,
And so, and we played some of those chicken wire clubs, and that was kind of our upbringing. Then we moved to Portland and started putting our band together there.
What led you to Portland? Because
I was born there.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mother remarried, and then when I wanted to go to the big city, leave the farm, Portland just seemed like the natural place to go.
Sure. Because it wasn't, Portland's never been known, unfortunately, as one of the areas that people want to go to, because they think of, the West Coast, Seattle, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, one of those 4 places. Portland's kind of comes up a distant 5th or something.
Yeah, it does.
So I was wondering what prompted you, but that explains it.
Yeah. And then I met some friends when I moved back to Portland that I knew from grade school. I moved away from Portland when I was in 2nd grade. So I had hooked up with some friends I knew in 1st and 2nd grade, and some of them happened to be musicians. And Jeff Seary was one of them, and he was our first keyboard player in the Dan Reed Network. So he introduced me into the music scene there, the different music stores, the clubs to play, and one thing led to another.
And one of the things, too, that always struck me about your band back then was that it was so diverse, I guess is the best way to describe it. It was a bunch of different people putting together a different sound that you hadn't really heard before on the radio. There was some interesting stuff going on.
That was kind of a lot of people say it was our downfall as well, just having this multiracial band.
Being artistic.
Yeah, being artistic, having songs. No, but and then the multiracial thing really confused people, especially in markets where they really like pigeonholing.
Yeah, you know, you think that you go back to, you weren't the first.
No,
you
not
know,
at all.
I mean,
Mother's
people that, you
Finest
know,
and Sly and the Family Stone.
yeah, that would be a couple of really good examples right there. The Allman Brothers, you know, would be somebody. There's other ones too.
Doobies, I think, were
yeah.
multiracial. It's just all. It was really confusing to us, but I also think it was the music because we all liked like hard rock and roll, and we also liked really funky stuff. So we were kind of a mixture between this Aerosmith Prince thing going on, and rock radio didn't know whether to play us, and definitely you know, funk and soul radio didn't know where to place us.
Right.
But when you go over to Europe, you have Radio 1, BBC Radio 1 in England, and they would play your song because they're countrywide, the station, and they're playing, you know, Bon Jovi next to Prince, next to, you know, Led Zeppelin.
It was almost like in Europe, for those that have never listened into to what they give over there, it reminds me a lot of what Top 40 radio used to be like here back in the 60s, and that you'd hear Sly and the Family Stone with Engelbert Humperdinck right next door to it, you know, and so you would actually get a taste of everything out there, you know, and it's still that way because I can remember I was working at another radio station. We pulled the BBC's Top 40 show, the Top 40 Countdown or something. And you would hear the most amazing collection of music that would be on their top 40, from the most esoteric, eclectic rock down to the most simplistic pop from Sweden. I mean, it was like everything in between. It was a very bizarre mix, but it was cool.
And they're still kind of doing that a little bit over there. They have their full-on, you know, power pop stations now, but there's still a lot of flexibility over in Europe with radio.
And they're still friends of yours over there.
Yeah, we're getting some airplay in Scandinavia and the UK, and playing a big festival, Sweden Rock, this summer with Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest, and I think Joan Jett's on the bill and Styx.
Nice little group of people.
Yeah,
you know, they sold a couple of records.
Yeah,
you know, you've toured Europe quite a bit. You toured Europe back in the day with Bon Jovi, and you did
the Stones. Yeah,
you did that's the thing too. It's like a lot of people. You opened for the Stones.
Yeah, we did like 22 shows with them.
I mean, and that was back the Steel Wheels tour, right?
With Steel Wheels here, it was called Urban Jungle in Europe, but it was that same year.
Same year.
Yeah.
So what was that like? I mean, the first time a kid from South Dakota, you know, opens up for Jagger and the Stones in Europe must have been, and they're just looking at a sea of people. Can you remember what you were feeling?
Yeah, there was two emotions I had. One was that I finally achieved this goal that we had since we were kids. The second one was that it was, in a way, where do you go from there? I mean, the next place it's instead of us opening for the Stones, the next position for us is to try to be in that position of the Stones. And right at that time, it was 1990, we did this tour. 91 is when Nirvana and all the Seattle scene broke out, 90 and 91. And some of those bands were friends of mine, Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone before they became Pearl Jam.
Right.
And I had just fallen in love with that darker, heavier, funky music that they were doing, and I just felt like the Danvig Network was not in that direction. And so here we were opening for the Stones. I was falling in love with this other music that I didn't feel we were on any path with.
Right.
And so I wanted to really take a break right after the Stones tour, and it ended up being like a 15-year break instead of a year off.
Whoopsie.
Much to the chagrin of the label.
Well, you know, it's you mentioned Alice in Chains. I was talking to it was Rob Halford.
Okay, yeah.
And he said he knew that his time was up at the label when he walked into the offices of his label, and instead of seeing his picture and the band's picture behind the receptionist desk, Alice in Chains' picture was there.
Okay.
And he realized that the writing was literally on the wall, that he was no longer one of the prime reasons for that label, and he wasn't surprised when he was jettisoned off shortly thereafter, because he could see the difference.
See, I left before we got jettisoned. I wanted to make the move first.
That's good.
And we never really left the label, but I remember like 3 years later, or 2 years after I stopped making records, we got a letter from Polygram saying, "We're letting you go." And I was like, okay. Well.
Now, did you have to, do they still own your stuff, or were you able to get it back?
They own that catalog of the 3 first network albums, and I have the right to license that material and re-release it as much as I want, as does anybody. But yeah, they own that for the rest of my life.
Yes, and lives after that. Well, also part of the problem too for you, I guess, was the fact that the label was going through a bit of turmoil at that particular time when your stuff was coming out. So they weren't really behind you 100% anyway. I mean, they were working on other stuff, and they were kind of dealing with the emergence of new artists.
Yeah, but I have to, in a way, disagree with that, because there was David Leach, who was the head of radio promotion there. I mean, you may know David. John Mazzacco, who was head of product management and marketing. Lauren Murphy, who was head of promotion, publicity. All of these folks worked pretty tirelessly on all 3 of the albums. the problem is that Derek Schulman left the label after our first album, who was our A&R guy. And so then you always, when you get an A&R guy that replaces the one that signed you, you're not their project,
right.
You know? So
they've got their own
they have their own bands that bring it in, and so it was hard to find that A&R person that had the same passion that Derek did. Mm-hmm. And I didn't blame Derek at all, because he had the opportunity to go start a whole new label and work with AC/DC, and it was a big step for him.
He went to AFCO, didn't he? So was that
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
That's exactly where he went.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, the main confusing part there. But everybody else at the label worked really hard. I did tons of radio tours and met a lot of great souls out there, both at the stations and people working for Polygram. So.
And it was that 15-year break that you took.
Yeah.
Well, you lived in Israel? You lived
yeah,
in India?
I did a lot of things. I did theater acting. I directed I wrote a script that got produced that I acted in. I owned a nightclub for 4 years, introducing electronic music to the rock crowd and rock music to the rave crowd.
Nice. Where was that?
That was in Portland.
That was in Portland?
It was called The Ohm.
Nice.
And that was a blessing and a curse, because it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about electronic music, but I also kind of succumbed to that nightlife style, because I kind of got depressed that I wasn't writing music anymore. So I started drinking and doing drugs to kind of sober up, and that became a nightmare. And then my father became ill and passed away, and that's what kind of woke me up to becoming clear-headed again. And so that's when I took off to India. Spent a year down there in Dharamsala, 4 months at a Tibetan monastery by the good graces of a couple monks that invited me there. And then after that I went to Jerusalem to kind of see what's the story there with this conflict. The whole world's focused on what's going on between Palestine and Israel. I wanted to find out myself, and fell in love with Jerusalem and all that place has to offer. So I spent 3 years there studying Judaism, Islam, and just befriending a great group of people and musicians. Started writing these songs.
And I was wondering, because the end result is this new album.
That's
of yours,
exactly right.
And it has, well, first of all, the theme behind it, seems very optimistic.
Yeah.
Very, very much of an encompassing world, kind of a world view. And I was wondering how, living with different cultures.
Yeah.
And becoming part of their culture, becoming part of the monastery,
yeah.
Which is a very tight knit, I would imagine,
yeah, it is.
group, and then to become part of of people in Jerusalem,
yeah.
and becoming part of that whole scene. How's that affected you?
Well, I know that before I went on that journey, I was quite torn by why we're so conflicted as a human race,
mm-hmm.
not just between wars and fighting for resources and what have you, corporations, and this dilemma that we face as a human race, but also religiously. Like, why are the religions all preaching this, compassion and love, and yet at the same time they can't get along with each other? So that's why I went on this journey, and afterwards I came back with hopefully a little more insight and understanding that everybody's reaching for this same mountaintop. They're just taking different roads to get there. And so for me, that argument is no longer in my heart and soul. I get along with everybody now, which is
well, the
kind
journey
of nice.
Obviously never ends. Where it is, it's affecting your music now. Did you find yourself? You said you weren't writing. You were doing script. You wrote the script, and then
yeah.
you were doing all the other stuff. When you started writing again, did it come out like a torrent, or was it kind of
no, it was
slow and steady?
Yeah, very slow. The first song I wrote is called On Your Side, which is on the new album. I wrote that when I was living in Dharamsala, and then I started working on a song called Coming Up for Air, which is the name of the record. And then when I moved to Jerusalem, I started writing the other songs, but I put a studio together with the help of a friend named Max Wassa from Florida, and I just started writing songs and sending them to her, sending them to Derek Schulman, who I got in touch with again, and he was kind of A&R'ing again, which 20 years later. And now Derek is good friends. I would be seeing him tomorrow night, but his sister just passed.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, you've got your guitar sitting here.
Yeah.
I'm dying to hear a version of this song. So
Okay.
why don't we tell? You're going to do
Brave New World.
Brave New World.
Yeah, this was also written partially in Jerusalem, and I finished recording it here in the States. It's just about how we as a human race love to embrace this concept that John Lennon preached, and Gandhi, and Jesus, and Martin Luther King, that compassion is the best weapon, and yet at the same time we seem to really embrace conflict.
We seem to like chaos.
Yeah, and we like writing Jesus loves you on side of bombs, and people like blowing up cafes saying God is great, so that at the same time, so this is just about how we're kind of torn between those two worlds.
Dan Reed live in the studio for Public Radio.
I bring you peace from the barrel unlock the room where we hide all the truth away. We all have the key, but we can't find the door. A wise man once said that an eye for an eye makes the world go blind. But I'm blinded by my rage, so I take my aim one more time. But in the end, you and I are one step from heaven, with one foot in hell. Well, we'll run to, it's hard to tell, in this brave new world we live in tonight. We learn to love, but we love to fight. It's a brave new world we've been given tonight. So hold on, brother, hold on tight. Hold on tight. Are we just a warm breath on the broken mirror where we draw pretty pictures and we all disappear? The lonely river slowly reaches for the sea. So can love reach you and me? A wise man once said that the violent heart cannot be tamed. But where is the wisdom when the man in the mirror can't take the blame? But in the end, we're one step from heaven, with one foot in hell. Where will we run to? It's hard to tell in this brave new world we live in tonight. We learn to love, but we love to fight. It's a brave new world we've been given tonight. So hold on, sister, hold on tight. Hold on to the fading light. La 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 la. But in the end, you and I are one step from heaven, with one foot in hell. Where will we run to? It's hard to tell in this brave new world we live in tonight. We learn to love, but we love to fight. It's a brave new world we've been given tonight. So hold on, brother, hold on tight. Hold on, sister, 'cause we almost found the light. Yeah, 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 we almost found the light. We'll get there.
That sounded great. It really did. Dan Reed live here in the studio. Brookdale Public Radio, 90.5 tonight. That is Brave New World, a track off the Coming Up for Air album, the new album from Dan, which has been out for a few months now.
Yeah, it's
right?
been out about, actually in Europe about 9 months and about 5 months in the States. Yeah.
So you're at the Saint tonight down at Asbury Park,
Yeah.
and then tomorrow night you're up in the city.
At the bitter end, and then Saturday we're playing at State Theater, doing a one song. I think it's going to be happening. We're going to be meeting with Glenn Burtnick today.
Oh, cool. Yeah, with
John
Bob
Lennon.
Berger and Lisa and the
Yeah,
whole crew. It's the
John
John
Lennon
Lennon
tribute.
70th thing. So I'll see you there.
Oh, great.
I'll be there too.
Great.
So You'll be sick of me by that. But anyhow, your website so people can find out
Yeah,
more
it's
about you.
danreed.com.
And then you'll be able to track you down.
Yeah.
And your CD is available.
You can get it on the website. Also, Allegro Music in the States is the distributor, so
Cool.
you can find it there as well.
And you can find it online too, and of course at the gigs, is the place to go to.
Absolutely.
And the gig tonight down at the Saints, great room. We're gonna play a track off of this album. It's a song called Closer, which you said is the lead track
Yeah.
in Europe right now. So
Yeah.
we're gonna give this one a listen. This is Dan Reed on Brookdale Public Radio, 94.5 The Night.
Thank you.